Arav was an ordinary young man, the kind of person who blended into the background of everyday life. He grew up in a small town where people knew each other by name, where the sound of vendors calling out their goods filled the streets, and where neighbors often stopped to talk at their doors. His life was simple but not easy. His father had worked as a school teacher, and his mother stitched clothes for the families nearby. Together they had raised Arav with values of honesty, kindness, and hard work. From a young age he learned the meaning of responsibility. When his father's health declined, Arav stepped in to support the family. He was just a young man with dreams but very few chances to chase them. Each day began early for him. He would rise with the sun, drink a quick cup of tea made by his mother, and head out for work. Arav worked with a small group that helped organize cultural and community events in the city. They were not highly paid, but it gave him enough to provide for his family and also allowed him to meet different people. He was the kind of person who, even in the toughest times, found a reason to smile. His friends often said he had a quiet strength about him, though Arav himself never thought much of it. Far away from his small world was the grand life of the palace. In the capital city, behind tall golden gates and gardens that stretched like fields of art, lived Princess Amira. She was the only daughter of the queen, admired by the people for her gentle nature and warm heart. From the outside, her life seemed perfect. She wore beautiful dresses, attended important gatherings, and lived in the comfort of royalty. But inside, Amira often felt trapped by her responsibilities. Being a princess meant living every moment under watch, where each decision was weighed by advisors and every step was followed by whispers of judgment. She longed for freedom, for a life where she could simply be herself, not just a figure for ceremonies and duties. The queen, her mother, had always been protective. She wanted Amira to be strong, graceful, and prepared to carry the legacy of their family. She believed her daughter's future would depend on the alliances she made, the decisions she took, and most importantly, the person she would one day marry. The queen imagined her daughter with a prince or someone of royal blood, someone whose name and influence would only add to the family's honor. But destiny had its own plan. It happened during a cultural event organized in the palace, an event that brought together artists, musicians, and workers from across the country. Arav was part of the small team that was invited to help set up and coordinate the program. He had never set foot inside such a place before. When he first walked through the gates, he was overwhelmed by the grand sight, marble pillars shining. In the evening light, gardens filled with roses and fountains that sang with water and halls decorated with paintings that told the history of kings and queens. For Arav, it was like stepping into another world. He was nervous. His clothes were plain compared to the silk robes and shimmering dresses around him. He kept his head down, focusing on his work. He arranged seats, guided guests, and ensured that everything ran smoothly. Yet even in this world so far from his own, his natural kindness shone through. When an elderly guest lost balance while walking, Arav rushed forward without hesitation, gently supporting the man and helping him to his seat. He did not care about the grand crowd watching. He acted from the heart, just as he always did in his town. That small act did not go unnoticed. Among the crowd, Princess Amira had been watching quietly. She was used to people showing off in front of her, trying to impress her with charm or wealth. But here was someone different. Arav had no intention to draw attention, no thought of reward, yet his actions spoke louder than words. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the hall. Arav quickly looked away, embarrassed, but Amira's curiosity was caught. Throughout the evening, she noticed how calmly he moved, how he treated everyone with equal respect, whether they were high officials or ordinary helpers. He did not try to shine, but in doing so, he seemed to glow in a way she could not ignore. Arav, on his side, never thought he would be noticed by the princess. To him, she was like a star, bright, distant, and far above his world. He had only seen her in news or portraits, and now, seeing her in person, he could not deny her grace. But what surprised him most was the simplicity in her smile, the way she nodded kindly to the artists who performed, and the gentle way she spoke with the children invited to the palace. For Arav, she seemed less like a figure on a throne and more like a human being, someone who carried the same heart as everyone else despite her crown. That night when Arav returned home, his mother asked him about the event. He described the palace, the lights, the music, but he kept silent about the princess. Something inside him told him not to speak about her, as if mentioning her name would make the memory vanish. Meanwhile, Princess Amira too lay awake, thinking about the young man she had seen. She did not even know his name. Yet the image of his quiet humility stayed with her. This was only the beginning. Two lives from two different worlds had brushed against each other, unknowingly setting the stage for a story that would challenge tradition, question expectations, and show what it meant to follow the heart. The palace event ended, but the memory of it stayed with both Arav and Princess Amira. Arav returned to his normal life the next morning, waking up early, going to work, and helping his mother with chores in the evening. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside, he carried a picture of the princess in his mind. He reminded himself again and again that she was someone far beyond his reach, and that their worlds were not meant to cross. Still, he could not forget the moment their eyes had met, even if only for a second. Princess Amira, too, found herself thinking about the young man she had seen at the event. She was surrounded by princes, noblemen, and officials who spoke polished words and carried expensive gifts. But none of them touched her heart the way that small act of kindness had. She remembered how naturally Arav had helped the old guest, with no thought of being noticed. For Amira, who had spent her life in a palace where everything was staged, planned, and rehearsed, that moment of sincerity felt refreshing. Days passed, and the palace organized more public charity programs and cultural gatherings. Arav, because of his dedication and reliability, was often chosen by his group to work on these projects. He was nervous every time he had to step into the palace again, but he reminded himself that he was only there for work. Still, deep down he knew he would likely see the princess, and that thought stirred a quiet excitement he tried to hide. Their second meeting happened during a book donation event for children. Arav was helping carry stacks of books into the palace library, while Amira was guiding the children through the shelves. She noticed Arav again, this time as he bent down to speak kindly to a little boy who was too shy to step forward. Arav handed him a book and whispered something that made the boy smile and walk confidently toward the princess. Amira watched, the scene unfold with a soft smile of her own. Later, when the event ended, she gathered her courage and walked toward Arav. He was surprised, almost stunned, when she addressed him directly. "You helped that child very well," she said with warmth in her voice. Arav quickly bowed his head, unsure how to reply. "I only did what anyone would have done, princess." "Not everyone does," she replied gently. "Sometimes the smallest actions mean the most." That was the first real conversation between them. It was short, but it carried more meaning than many long speeches Amira had heard in her life. Arav walked away from the palace that day with his heart beating faster than ever, while Amira felt a strange joy she had never experienced before. From that day on, their paths began crossing more often. Whenever the palace held a community program, Arav was there, and Amira always found a way to notice him, even in a hall full of people. Slowly, she began asking him small questions about the events, about his work, sometimes even about his hometown. Arav answered politely, always respectful, but he never tried to speak more than necessary. He feared that if he became too familiar, he might cross a line he was not supposed to. Yet in those brief exchanges, Amira saw the difference between Arav and the noblemen around her. Where others tried to impress her with fancy words, Arav spoke simply and honestly. Where others showed off their wealth, Arav showed kindness through his actions. She began to look forward to these small conversations, and even though they lasted only minutes, they felt more real to her than hours spent in grand meetings. One afternoon, during a food distribution program in the palace courtyard, a sudden summer rain began to fall. Guests rushed inside, but Arav stayed outside, helping the workers cover the food supplies so nothing would spoil. His clothes were soaked, but he did not stop until everything was safe. Amira, standing by the doorway, saw this and could not help but step outside with an umbrella. She held it over him without a word. Arav looked up, shocked to see her there. "Princess, you should not be out in the rain," he said quickly. "And you should not be working in it alone," she replied with a soft determination. For a moment, they stood there under the umbrella, the rain falling around them. Arav felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, nervousness, and something deeper he could not name. That moment carved itself into both their hearts as something unforgettable. The bond between them grew stronger, though it remained unspoken. Arav never dared to dream too much. He knew his place, knew the distance between his life and hers. Yet he could not deny the peace he felt in her presence. Amira, on the other hand, found herself drawn to Arav in a way that went beyond logic. For the first time, she felt she was not just a princess, but simply a young woman, seen for who she was rather than for her crown. But whispers had already begun inside the palace. Servants noticed how often the princess's eyes followed the young man. Officials raised their eyebrows at her kindness toward him. Even though nothing had been spoken aloud, people were quick to draw their own conclusions. Some dismissed it as nothing more than curiosity, but others saw it as a possible challenge to royal tradition. For Arav, the days became heavier. He could feel the eyes of others on him whenever he worked inside the palace. Sometimes he thought about stepping away, asking his group not to assign him there anymore. But each time, something inside him stopped him. Perhaps it was duty, or perhaps it was the quiet pull of destiny that kept him returning. Princess Amira, however, felt no such hesitation. She had grown up learning to smile politely, to hide her feelings, and to carry herself with grace. But with Arav, she felt no need for masks. She was still careful, knowing the weight of her position, but in her heart she already sensed that this was the beginning of something that would not be easy to ignore. And so, as the rain dried and the days turned into weeks, a bond formed between the ordinary young man and the princess of the palace. It was still fragile, hidden under layers of silence and caution, but it was real. Neither of them knew where it would lead, yet both felt it was only the start of a story that would test not only their hearts but also the strength of tradition. The connection between Arav and Princess Amira grew quietly but steadily, like a small flame that refused to go out no matter how much the wind tried to blow it away. Every time Arav entered the palace for an event, his heart would beat faster. He told himself again and again that he was just a worker and nothing more, but he could not deny how much he looked forward to seeing her. Princess Amira, too, found herself smiling at the thought of meeting him, even if it was only for a short exchange of words. What made their bond special was its simplicity. They did not share grand gestures or secret promises. Instead, they spoke about small things, the happiness of helping others, the beauty of a simple evening, the joy of reading a good book, or the importance of kindness. These conversations, though ordinary in words, carried extraordinary meaning for both of them. Amira felt free with Arav. She did not need to think about how she looked or whether her words were correct according to royal protocol. Arav treated her as a human being, not a figure on a throne, and that gave her a sense of peace she had never felt before. Yet deep inside, Arav was torn. He respected the princess and admired her heart, but he also knew their worlds were completely different. He was a man from a small town, living a life without luxury. She was royalty, living under rules and expectations that were centuries old. Sometimes at night, he would sit by his window and ask himself if it was wrong to even enjoy these moments with her. Was he setting himself up for heartbreak? He thought about stepping back, about creating distance. But then he would remember her smile and the way she spoke to him, not like a princess but like a friend. And his resolve would weaken. On the other side, Amira was beginning to feel the weight of her world pressing harder. Her mother, the queen, had already started discussing her future. There were suitors, princes from neighboring kingdoms and wealthy nobles who offered alliances. Ministers whispered about which choice would bring the most benefit to their people. For everyone around her, Amira's marriage was not about love. It was about politics, about maintaining the strength of the throne. Amira listened quietly, but inside her heart resisted. She knew that none of those men understood her or cared for her as a person. They saw only the crown she wore. The more she compared their polished words to Arav's quiet sincerity, the clearer her heart became. But clarity did not bring peace. It brought fear. She knew that if she chose Arav, she would have to stand against tradition, against the expectations of her family, and even against the rules of the kingdom itself. It was not a simple decision. It was like walking into a storm without knowing if there would be calm on the other side. The whispers in the palace grew louder. Servants noticed the way the princess smiled when Arav was around. Some of the officials warned the queen, carefully suggesting that her daughter was paying too much attention to someone who did not belong to their world. At first, the queen dismissed these rumors. She believed her daughter would never risk her royal duty for something so fragile. But when she began to see it with her own eyes, the way Amira looked at him, the way her tone softened when she spoke to him, the queen's doubts turned into worry. One evening, after a long day of ceremonies, Amira sat by the palace balcony, lost in thought. Arav's words from earlier that day echoed in her mind. He had spoken about his hometown, about how neighbors shared each other's joys and sorrows, about how life was simple but meaningful. She imagined herself there, away from the weight of royal duties, just living like an ordinary person. The thought made her heart lighter, but it also brought tears to her eyes. Could such a dream ever be real for her? Meanwhile, Arav felt the growing distance of reality pressing in. He had begun to hear the murmurs too. A fellow worker once teased him, saying, "The princess seems to notice you often. Be careful, brother. Dreams like that can burn." Arav had laughed it off, but inside he knew the words carried truth. The more visible his bond with Amira became, the more dangerous it was for both of them. Still, no matter how much he tried, he could not walk away. Every time he thought of stepping back, fate seemed to push him into another meeting with her. When she smiled, his worries faded. When she spoke kindly, his fears grew weak. It was as though the universe itself was testing the strength of his heart. The breaking point came when the queen summoned Amira to discuss her marriage. She spoke with authority, listing the names of noblemen who had shown interest, explaining how their alliances could strengthen the kingdom. Amira listened silently until her mother finally asked, "Do you have someone in your heart?" For the first time, Amira hesitated. Her silence was enough for the queen to sense the truth. That night, the queen ordered her most trusted advisor to keep an eye on her daughter. Soon enough, the advisor confirmed what the queen feared. The princess was drawn to Arav, the young man from the small town. The queen was shocked. She could not understand how her daughter, who had everything, wealth, beauty, and royal suitors, could even think of choosing someone so ordinary. A storm was about to begin, but neither Arav nor Amira fully realized it yet. To them, the moments they shared still felt innocent, still felt like a secret gift from destiny. They did not see how quickly the world around them was closing in. And so the bond that began with small acts of kindness had grown into something deeper, something powerful yet forbidden. Arav's humility and Amira's courage had brought them together, but now they stood on the edge of a challenge that would test not only their love but also their strength to stand against the world. The story of the ordinary man and the princess was no longer just a quiet friendship. It was becoming a choice that would either bind them together forever or tear them apart under the weight of duty, tradition, and fear. The palace had grown restless. The queen could no longer ignore the whispers that floated through the grand halls. Ministers spoke in quiet tones, and servants exchanged knowing glances. Everyone seemed to sense that something unusual was unfolding between the princess and the young man from the small town. One evening, during a royal dinner, the truth could no longer hide itself. Arav was part of the workers ensuring that the event ran smoothly. He moved through the hall quietly, arranging things without disturbing anyone. But the queen, seated at the long golden table, noticed something that unsettled her deeply. She saw the way her daughter's eyes followed him. Amira tried to hide it, but a mother's eyes are sharp. Every glance, every slight change in her daughter's expression spoke louder than words. The queen's heart grew heavy. She was proud of her daughter and wanted her happiness, but she could not allow her to throw away centuries of tradition for someone so far beneath their status. She decided the time for silence was over. Later that night, after the dinner ended and the palace grew quiet, the queen called her daughter to her chambers. The air was tense. Amira knew why her mother had summoned her, but she entered calmly, her heart steady. The queen stood tall, her eyes stern yet full of concern. "That human?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Is it true, Amira? Do you look at him as more than just a worker?" For a moment, silence filled the room. The princess felt the weight of the question pressing on her chest, but she did not hesitate. She lifted her head, her eyes clear and determined, and answered, "Yes, he's the one I chose." The queen's face froze. She had expected denial, perhaps even tears, but not such boldness. Her daughter's words struck her like thunder. "Do you realize what you are saying?" she demanded. "You are a princess, heir to this throne. Your life is not your own to gamble away. You cannot choose a commoner as if you were a villager free to follow her heart." But Amira did not waver. "Mother," she said softly yet firmly, "I know who I am. I know my duty, but I also know my heart. Arav is honest, kind, and good. He sees me as a person, not as a crown. Isn't that worth more than titles?" The queen was torn between anger and sorrow. She loved her daughter too much to shout at her, but she could not accept such defiance. She reminded Amira of her responsibilities, of the alliances and trust of the people. "Our kingdom depends on you," she said. "One wrong choice can weaken everything your ancestors built." Amira's eyes filled with quiet strength. "And what about me, mother? What about my happiness? What about living a life that is true? If I cannot choose love, then what is the meaning of all this wealth and power?" The queen felt her chest tighten. She had never seen her daughter so strong, so unyielding. This was not the gentle little girl she had raised. This was a young woman ready to fight for her heart. News of the queen's confrontation reached Arav, through whispers among the workers. He felt his world shake. He knew this would happen sooner or later, but hearing it made him restless. That night he sat by his window, struggling with himself. He wondered if he should step back, if distancing himself from the princess would protect her from more pain. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he knew he could not lie to his heart. He loved her, though he had never spoken the word aloud. The following days in the palace were heavy with tension. Ministers approached the queen, advising her to stop this bond before it spread further. Some warned that the people would never accept such a union, while others whispered that it might inspire rebellion among those who wanted freedom from strict traditions. The queen watched everything with a worried heart. She had wanted her daughter to grow strong, but now that strength was being used against her own wishes. And deep inside, a question troubled her. Was she protecting her daughter's future, or was she simply afraid of change? A storm had been unleashed in the palace, and its outcome was uncertain. The days that followed were the hardest for both Arav and Princess Amira. The queen avoided speaking about the matter directly, but her silence was heavy. Amira knew her mother was not ready to accept Arav, but she refused to give up. Meanwhile, Arav decided to keep proving himself, not with words, but with actions. He continued working with his group, helping in every event, serving not just the palace, but the common people too. He built small reading centers for children in his town, helped families rebuild their homes after floods, and never once used his closeness with the princess for his benefit. People began to respect him more and more, calling him a man of heart, rather than of status. Princess Amira, whenever she heard about his work, felt her love for him grow stronger. She often tried to tell her mother about these things, hoping the queen would see what she saw in Arav. But the queen's heart remained guarded. One evening, a festival was held in the capital. The queen, the princess, and the royal family attended, and so did Arav's group, as part of the organizers. During the festival, a sudden accident occurred. A stage decoration caught fire. Panic spread through the crowd and people began rushing to escape. Arav did not think twice. He ran into the fire zone, guiding children and elders out safely. His clothes were burned, his hands injured, but he did not stop until everyone was safe. The queen, watching from the balcony, saw the young man's courage with her own eyes. She saw him risk his life not for reward, not for attention, but because his heart could not allow him to do otherwise. And when she saw her daughter run to him after the fire was put out, kneeling beside him with tears in her eyes, the queen finally understood. That night, she sat alone in her chamber, her thoughts heavy. She thought about her daughter's words, about Arav's courage, about the meaning of honor. For years, she had believed honor came only from alliances, from power, from keeping tradition unbroken. But watching Arav, she realized honor could also come from truth, from goodness, from love that was pure. The next morning, she called Amira to her side. Her face was softer now, her voice no longer sharp. "If this is truly the man you choose," she said slowly, "then he must be tested, not by bloodline, but by character. And from what I have seen, he has already begun to prove himself." Amira's eyes filled with hope. She thanked her mother with a heart full of gratitude. For the first time, the queen did not look at Arav as just a commoner. She looked at him as a man who had the courage to stand by her daughter, even against the weight of tradition. Months later, after much discussion and careful steps, the queen gave her blessing. The palace announced that the princess had chosen a partner not from royalty, but from among the people. The kingdom was shocked, but slowly many began to admire the decision. They saw it as a sign of change, a message that love and character could matter more than wealth and titles. Amira and Arav stood together, not as a princess and a commoner, but as two people who chose each other despite the odds. Their story became one that inspired others to believe in the strength of the heart. The queen, watching them, finally found peace. She had not lost her daughter. She had given her the freedom to live with truth. And so, the story that began with a simple act of kindness ended with a bond strong enough to challenge tradition itself. The words once spoken with disbelief, "that human," had turned into acceptance, proving that sometimes the bravest choice is to follow the heart, no matter how impossible it may seem.